You've worked hard for what you have. Your money, your assets, your 401k, and home. Isn't it all worth protecting? Nearly 1 in 4 consumers have been a victim of identity theft. LifeLock Ultimate Plus helps protect your finances with up to $3 million in reimbursement. LifeLock alerts you to identity threats you might miss. And if your identity is stolen, your dedicated U.S.-based restoration specialist will work to fix it. Let LifeLock help protect what you've worked so hard for. Save 25% off your first year on LifeLock Ultimate Plus at LifeLock.com/aware. Terms apply.
Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Hey everybody, good afternoon. I'm Susan Kaufman and you are listening to this week's Attitude Magazine's ADHD Experts audio webinar. This week's webinar is brought to you by Attention 360. Attention 360 is a Pearson ADHD solution, an online communication portal that helps parents, school, and medical professionals all communicate better with one another and leads to better outcomes for children with ADHD. So visit attention360.com for a free trial. Our topic today is solving ADHD behavior challenges in the classroom and at home, and our guest is Greene, Ph.D. Dr. Greene is the author of 2 extremely important and very eye-opening books for parents of children with behavior challenges at home and at school, and I can't recommend these books highly enough. They are The Explosive Child and Lost at School. In these books, he explains why stigmatizing our kids just isn't the right approach, and why figuring out and understanding the cause of children's behavior is really the key to finding solutions for any specific child. We're big believers in Dr. Greene's theories and perspectives of attitude, and we're pleased to have him join us today. Dr. Greene is an associate clinical professor in the Department of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. He is the founder of the nonprofit organization Lives in the Balance, livesinthebalance.org, provides free web-based resources to support behaviorally challenged kids and their parents, teachers, and caregivers. So thank you so much for being with us today, Dr. Greene. We're grateful for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me to do this. And the first thing I should say is that while I was indeed associated with Harvard Medical School for over 20 years, I'm now with the Department of Psychology at Virginia Tech. But enough of that. Let's move on to the thing that we really want to talk about here, and that is how to solve ADHD kids' behavioral challenges at school. Because of the hyperactivity and or poor impulse control and or inattention that goes along with the ADHD diagnosis, those core features of the disorder can set the stage for all kinds of different behavioral challenges at school. As most of you probably know, ADHD is comorbid with many other psychiatric disorders. If you know my work, then you know that I'm not very disorder-oriented. I'm much more oriented toward the skills kids are lacking. And so in the case of ADHD, the skills that kids with ADHD are lacking often fall into the executive skills category. And because executive skills has become a very common part of our language, my bet is that you've heard of that as well. But we are talking about skills like forethought, the ability to project solutions into the future so as to evaluate likely outcomes and pick the best one. We're talking about hindsight, the ability to reflect on past experience so as to inform solutions and courses of action in the present. Talking about working memory, your ability to hold things in your multiple things in your mind at the same time, organization, planning, all those. The lack of those skills can make the expectations of a school classroom, both academic and behavioral, but also social, extremely difficult for kids with ADHD. Now, that tells you that kids with ADHD, in many ways, but in ways that are unique to each kid, I can't really say anything that would be true of every ADHD kid. I just know that the lagging skills that typically come into play with kids who carry that diagnosis make school classrooms and school buses and school playgrounds difficult, and school hallways very difficult for ADHD kids to manage, but in ways that are unique to each ADHD kid. Now, that's what the kid is bringing to the table. What is the school bringing to the table? Well, what the school is bringing to the table is a whole bunch of expectations for how we should conduct ourselves at school, how we should learn at school, what we should learn at school, how we should get along with people at school. We expect kids to raise their hand without calling out answers. We expect kids, generally speaking, to sit still. We expect them to complete their work. We have a lot of expectations. Now the bad news. The expectations that we are placing on kids have increased over the years. The position we place teachers in because of our obsession with high-stakes testing, as many respected educators will tell you, it's turned many classroom teachers into test prep robots, into technicians. It's made it much more difficult for classroom teachers and administrators in schools to deal with problems in a compassionate, humane, effective way. Now more bad news. Most traditional school discipline programs emphasize rewarding and especially punishment. And I'm sorry to report that rewarding and punishing is not going to teach kids the skills they're lacking. And it's not going to solve the problems that are being caused by those lagging skills. Not only that, kids who are having difficulty meeting expectations are on the receiving end of many natural consequences. Peer rejection, academic failure, embarrassment, etc. So the natural consequences are there already. Natural consequences, of course, are consequences that are going to occur naturally. In many schools, what do we do when a kid is not adequately altering course fueled by the natural consequences? We add more consequences. Those of the unnatural or artificial variety, as in the form of staying in from recess, detention, suspension, being sent to the office, expulsion, and still in 19 American states, paddling. Those are not natural. Those are not natural consequences. Those are artificial, unnatural consequences, and they are frequently applied when the natural consequences haven't gotten the job done. But, as it says on the slide, children who haven't responded to natural consequences don't need more consequences added to the mix. They need something else from us. Let's talk about what that something else might be. My model, as described in The Explosive Child and Lost at School, and what used to be called collaborative problem solving, but is now called collaborative and proactive solutions. That's a long story that we don't have time for here. It is not a pleasant tale. Helps us change the playing field for kids who are having difficulty meeting our expectations in school in a few different ways. One huge way is that it helps us focus less, if at all, on the kid's challenging behavior and trying to modify it, and helps us focus instead on the problems that are being caused by those behaviors and solving them. Now, that's big. That may not sound big, but in many instances what we're focused on as we're trying to help a kid is his behavior, but behavior is the byproduct. What's causing the behavior? Problems. When we're focused on behavior, what are we busy doing? Trying to modify it. But when we're focused on the problems that are causing those behaviors, we are instead in problem-solving mode. And that's the mode we want to be in. As I always say, you can modify behavior till the cows come home. The problems that are giving rise to those behaviors will remain. But if you're focused on solving the problems that are giving rise to those behaviors, not only will the problems get solved, the behaviors, the research tells us, will subside. In other words, CPS is an upstream model, not a downstream model. Behavior is what's going on downstream. The problems that are causing those behaviors are what are going on upstream. In this model, we are focused on what's going on upstream, not on what's going on downstream. And that is huge because a big part of school discipline is focused on behavior. And a lot of the assessment practices that we employ utilize behavior checklists. Well, soon I will be introducing you to a different instrument. And what does it help you identify? A kid's lagging skills and the problems that are being caused by those lagging skills, what I call unsolved problems. The assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems accomplishes a few missions for us. What the assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems helps us do, and by that's the acronym is ALSUP, is it helps us figure out what skills a particular kid is lacking. And that helps us see this kid's difficulties through the prism of lagging skills, not through the prism of lagging motivation. For a very, very long time, we've been viewing kids' behavioral challenges through the prism of lagging motivation. And that's why things like attention-seeking, manipulative, coercive, unmotivated, limit testing, that's why we've been saying a lot of those things, there it is, that's why we've been saying a lot of those things about behaviorally challenging kids for a very long time. But when adults get together and as you're looking at the left side of the assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems there, what you're seeing is a list of the skills the research tells us are frequently found lacking in behaviorally challenging kids. Now, it's not an exhaustive list, it's a representative list, but when adults get together and start trying to figure out what lagging skills apply to a particular behaviorally challenging student, a very wonderful thing happens. They stop using the motivational explanations to understand this kid's difficulties, and then another wonderful thing happens. They stop, we hope, applying motivational interventions, rewards and punishments, to try to address the kid's difficulties. If a kid is really lacking skills, and all we're busy doing is trying to give him the incentive to do well, I don't think this is going to go very well. On the right-hand side of the assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems is where we're going to be writing in unsolved problems. Now, let me give you some examples of unsolved problems. Unsolved problems usually start with the word difficulty, as in difficulty getting started on the quadratic equations in math. Difficulty completing the double-digit division problems on the worksheet in math. Difficulty writing the term paper in English. Difficulty writing the definitions to the spelling words in English. Difficulty getting along with Chad during the Foursquare game at recess. Difficulty getting along with Susie on the school bus. Difficulty keeping hands to self in the hallway when moving from recess back to the classroom. Now, that's just a sampling. Lagging skills give you the global picture. They let you know globally what's going on with this kid. Unsolved problems tell you what you're working on. That's right, this is a problem-solving model. So what you're going to be busy doing in ways that I'm going to describe in just a few minutes is you're going to be solving those problems with this kid. And here's what the research also tells us. When you are busy solving problems with kids, and when you do it collaboratively and proactively, you are simultaneously teaching the kid the skills he or she is lacking. The assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems can be found in the paperwork section of the Lives in the Balance website, but there's a search box on the Lives in the Balance website, and if you put assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems in there, you'll find it. And all you got to do is print it out. It's free. just like virtually everything else on the Lives in a Balance website. Okay, let's go back to our other slides. Now you know about the assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems. It's not a behavior checklist. It's a discussion guide to help caregivers figure out what skills a kid is lacking so they have the right lenses on and what problems we could be busy solving. So here's our motto: behind every challenging behavior is an unsolved problem and a lagging skill. Another way to say unsolved problems is the specific expectations a student is having difficulty meeting. If we expect students to keep their hands to themselves when they're in the hallway on the way from recess back to the classroom, then all we got to do is put the word difficulty in front of that expectation if we have a kid who's having difficulty meeting that expectation, and you got yourself an unsolved problem. If our expectation is that the kids will raise their hand during social studies discussions, and this particular student is having difficulty with that, all we got to do is put the word difficulty in front of that expectation, and you got yourself an unsolved problem. We've already taken a look at the ALSUP. You'll see all kinds of lagging skills on the ALSUP. In that bullet, it names a few of them, but there's many more. But many kids who meet criteria for ADHD have difficulty making transitions. Many of them have difficulty organizing themselves. Many of them have difficulty with the concept of time. Time is a concept? Yeah, time is a concept. Many of us know what 10 minutes feels like. And we're not looking at our watch to know what 10 minutes feels like. We just know what 10 minutes feels like. Many kids diagnosed with ADHD don't know what 10 minutes feels like. So after 10 minutes, when we give them a 10-minute warning, 10 minutes later when we tell them, okay, time to stop, they're surprised because they don't know what 10 minutes feels like. But you'll want to take a look at the assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems for the vast array. And it's not even an exhaustive list. If I had tried to be exhaustive, the ALSUP would be 10 to 15 pages long. And by the way, that's probably the most exciting thing that's happened in the field of children's behavior problems in the last 40 to 50 years. What's happened in the last 40 to 50 years is that researchers have identified the dozens upon dozens of skills that behaviorally challenging kids are lacking. And that means we can talk about them in terms of lagging skills and not all that other stuff we often say about them. Here's the basic goal. Because the ALSUP is free, and because people can get it off of the Lives in a Balance website in a heartbeat, the goal is to have everybody who's in a meeting about a behaviorally challenging student have a blank copy of the ALSUP in front of them, and for us to have a discussion about this particular student's lagging skills and unsolved problems. And what happens? Well, many behaviorally challenging students we find have a lot of lagging skills. And while that's not a wonderful thing, it kind of is a wonderful thing because it provides very compelling evidence for the fact that this kid is indeed lacking a lot of skills. And it also gives us an entirely new language, as we've already talked about, for talking about this kid. What also happens is we identify unsolved problems. And by the way, if we're doing this for the first time with a student who's been behaviorally challenging for a very long time, he's going to have a lot of unsolved problems. By the way, why does he have so many unsolved problems? Because we haven't been focused on the problems. We've been focused on the behavior that's the byproduct of those problems. And if all you're doing is focusing on the behavior, the problems won't get solved. Plus, since we've been focused on the behavior, we may not have even identified the problems that are causing the behavior. Not good. If we don't identify the problems, we won't know what problems need to be solved. Now we might be feeling a little bit overwhelmed because he may have 10, 20, 30 unsolved problems. And what we're going to have to do is prioritize, because we're not going to be able to work on them all at once. We're only going to be able to work on a few at a time. We have to prioritize. If we try working on all of them at once, none of them will get solved. One of the biggest reasons, another big reason the unsolved problems of behaviorally challenging kids remain unsolved is because we tried working on them all at once, thereby guaranteeing that none of them would get solved. All right. Now we're ready to start solving problems. We've identified them. We've got the right lenses on because we've identified lagging skills too. We've prioritized which unsolved problems are we working on right now and which unsolved problems are we not working on right now. Now let's start solving problems. And the way in which we go about solving problems collaboratively, I call Plan B. Plan B. And Plan B consists of 3 steps. Solving a problem collaboratively together consists of 3 steps. Those 3 steps are called the empathy step. This is where we are gathering information about the kid's concern or perspective on the unsolved problem we're talking with him about right now, preferably proactively. We don't want to be doing this in the heat of the moment. We don't need to be doing this in the heat of the moment. We've identified our unsolved problems already, and we've already decided which ones we're working on and which ones we're not. No reason for us to be doing this problem solving in the heat of the moment. The define adult concern step is where the adult is entering their concern or perspective into consideration. And the invitation is where student and adult are brainstorming solutions together, collaborating on solutions that are both realistic, meaning both parties can actually do what they're agreeing to do, and mutually satisfactory, meaning the concerns of both parties have truly and logically been addressed. The first reaction many educators have to Plan B is the 4-letter word that plagues all new initiatives in almost every school, T-I-M-E, time. When does he think we're going to do this? Well, people are always wondering about time when they are first starting to implement this model in a building. 3 or 4 months later, they're not talking about time at all. What they're saying 3 or 4 months in is Plan B saves time. Plan B saves time, especially compared to all the time we've been spending dealing with this kid's behavior and punishing him and doing whatever we've been doing to him. Plan B never takes that long. One thing I will say, no profession has more initiatives thrown at it than teachers. I think educators are suffering from a bad case of initiative fatigue. And so many educators are rightfully concerned about time. Plus, educators are being told that they aren't necessarily being told that their job performance is going to be judged by the problems they're solving. They're told that their job performance is going to be judged by how their kids do on high-stakes testing. Not good. Making sure that there are high standards is a wonderful thing. Turning teachers into test prep robots, into technicians, not a wonderful thing. Now, the model that you have just heard me describe quite briefly has been implemented in countless schools, countless inpatient psychiatry units, residential facilities, juvenile detention facilities. With very dramatic effects, this model has been shown to significantly reduce discipline referrals, significantly reduce detentions, suspensions, been shown to significantly reduce the use of restraint and seclusion in inpatient psychiatry units and in juvenile detention settings. This is how we adults become human beings again, by treating behaviorally challenging kids like they are human beings. We often reserve our worst for kids who have behavioral challenges. And while it's hard to give them our best because they may be disrupting the classroom, they may be making life very difficult at home, it's a tragedy that kids with behavioral challenges are often on the receiving end of our worst. Now, one of the things many of the parents that I work with complain about is that they are having difficulty collaborating with the folks at school. Amazingly enough, one of the things the educators I work with complain about the most is that they're having difficulty communicating and collaborating with the folks at home. I think that the exact same ingredients that can be applied to collaborating with kids can also be applied to adult collaboration. Often parents and educators are making the same mistakes with each other that we sometimes make with our kids. We don't figure out what each other's concerns are. Instead, we just throw solutions at each other. And then we are involved in what's called competing solutions, or what's also known as a power struggle. Same thing that goes on with kids goes on between adults. Those same three ingredients. And helping everybody, parents and educators, see this student through the shared prism of lagging skills and unsolved problems, making sure that everybody's on the same page. That's what helps parents and educators work better together. So let's go to the questions now.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Greene. That was a very clear overview. Number of people have asked where they can find the handouts, and again, they will be on the Attitude website, attitudemag.com/webinars. You'll be able to download this and print out this webinar, and Dr. Greene's website, livesinthebalance.org, also has handouts, as he mentioned. Turning to the question as to whether this method works for teenagers. Clearly, I think you're saying it does.
Well, I can't think of anything different that I would be doing with a teenager.
Right.
Teenagers insist on being heard. That's the empathy step. What I find is that, well, truth is, I don't limit this by age. Often the question is, can you do this with a very young kid? The answer is just as much yes as it is with a teenager. Bottom line is, kids of every age have legitimate concerns, want their concerns to be heard, want their concerns to be clarified, want their concerns to be addressed, and are a whole lot more willing to listen to ours when we are listening to theirs, and are a whole lot more invested in coming up with solutions that work for both of us. But we got to model that for them. If all we're doing to a teenager or a 2-year-old is telling them what to do, and what we're telling them that they got to do addresses only our concerns, well, you know the expression about reaping what you sow.
Okay, makes sense. Several people have asked whether you could take a specific behavior and give them a sort of a problem-solving example at a granular level, how you identify an unsolved problem and then how you problem solve.
Got it. All right. So let's
for example, someone trouble controlling emotional response is one example someone asked about, or whatever.
That's a lagging skill. That's a lagging skill. Let's say that, and the first part of your question is, can we take a behavior? And no, I can't take a behavior.
Okay.
I can take an unsolved problem that is causing the behavior. But remember, in this model, we're not working on behavior. We're working on behavior indirectly. In this model, we're working on the problems that are causing those behaviors. That's what we're working on directly. But let's take a behavior, because many people are still in the habit of starting with a behavior. So I'm going to start with a behavior. Running out of the classroom and screaming. That's a behavior, all right? Now, here's the bad news about working on a behavior. First of all, let's acknowledge we don't want the kid to do that. So that's a given. But if we're only working on the behavior, and this kid is running out of the classroom and screaming in response to several dozen different unsolved problems, then if all we're doing is working on the behavior, then we are trying to solve several dozen different unsolved problems all at the same time. We're trying to solve, let's say he's running out of the classroom and screaming when we remind him that he's supposed to raise his hand without calling out. Let's say he's also running out of the classroom and screaming when he's having difficulty completing the double-digit division problems on the worksheet in math. Is the same solution going to solve those two problems? No way. But that's what we suck ourselves into when we're focused on behavior, not unsolved problems. So now let me take one of those unsolved problems. Difficulty raising hand during social studies discussions. In the empathy step, here's what it's going to sound like. We're going to be sitting with the kid. We're doing this proactively. I've noticed that you sometimes have difficulty raising your hand during social studies discussions. What's up? That's the introduction to the empathy step. Now let's see what he says. And most kids are going to say something, believe it or not, especially if we're not asking them about their behavior. Kids clam up when you ask them about their behavior. Here's what you're going to get here's what it would sound like if you're asking about the kid's behavior. And once again, this is an example of what not to do. I've noticed you get upset and run out of the classroom and scream. What's up? I don't know. Number one, you've just made the kid defensive because he thinks he's in trouble. Number two, you've just simultaneously asked him about 27 different unsolved problems because that's the behavior he exhibits in response to each of those unsolved problems. But now let's go with one of those unsolved problems. Let's see what he might say. If I don't call out the answer, I'm going to forget what I wanted to say. Now that actually wouldn't be an atypical response for a kid diagnosed with ADHD, but it also wouldn't be an atypical response for a kid who might have a language processing and communication issue. All right, so the empathy step usually takes 5 to 15 minutes, but I'm going to push it forward here so we can get to other questions. But let's say that what we've established is that the reason the kid is calling out answers without raising his hand is because he feels that if he doesn't call out the answer, he's going to forget what he wanted to say. Now comes the define adult concerns step. Adult concerns usually fall into one or both of two categories: how the unsolved problem is affecting the kid, how the unsolved problem is affecting other people. So let's roll with one of those. Here's what the define adult concern step starts with. My concern is, or the thing is, so here we go. The thing is, if you call out answers, then other kids sometimes don't get their turn to say what they wanted to say. Good concern? Now we're ready for the invitation. The invitation starts with the words, I wonder if there's a way. And what you're going to do in the invitation is recap the concerns of both parties. So it would sound something like this. I wonder if there's a way for us to do something to help you remember what it is that you wanted to say, that was the kids' concerns, so that the other kids in the class have a chance to say what they wanted to say. That was the adult's concern. And then you're giving the kid the first crack at the solution. You got any ideas? Now, maybe he does and maybe he doesn't. If he doesn't, we hope you do, but most of the time, they do have an idea. A potential solution to this problem is that the kid, I've solved this problem many times and in many different ways, but one of the solutions that has solved this problem, and by the way, we don't go into Plan B with preordained solutions. We don't know where the plane is landing before it takes off. This is an open-ended process. We don't go in already knowing what the solution is, but I can tell you that one of the solutions I've seen for that is that the kid writes his idea down on a card so that he won't forget what he was going to say, and so that he can raise his hand and finally get called on by the teacher. Do the other kids get to say what they wanted to say? Yes. Does he remember what he wanted to say? Yes. Is it mutually satisfactory? Apparently so. Is it realistic? Depends on the kid. If it's not realistic and if it's not mutually satisfactory, we're going to have to come up with something that is realistic and mutually satisfactory, and that's how this process rolls.
Okay. How early can you start this? Some people are wondering about 5- and 6-year-olds who don't seem able to discuss well what's going on, I guess.
All right. Well, people are going to be stunned by the answer then. Number one, you collaborate with infants. Mm-hmm. You don't do it in words, but you do try to figure out what's getting in the infant's way. You do try to apply solutions that you think will address what you think is getting in the way. And then you are 100% dependent on the infant to let you know how you are doing. All of that without words. I do this with 2-year-olds. So 5 and 6, no problem.
Can you give an example of a conversation with a 5 or 6-year-old?
To tell you the truth, it wouldn't sound any different. People
Really? Okay.
people tend to slice the pie by chronological age, but I've been doing this a really long time. I've worked with some 3- and 4-year-olds who were better at this than some of the 17-year-olds I've done it with. And so the real way to slice the pie is not by chronological age. It sounds different with every 17-year-old. It sounds different with every 3- or 4-year-old, but it doesn't sound dramatically different from what you just heard. The real way to slice the pie is by language processing and communication skills. Does this kid have the language processing and communication skills to be able to participate in the linguistic give and take that is involved in the process as I just modeled it? If not, we're going to have to find ways to communicate with this kid about 3 things that do not involve words. And what are those 3 things? What's the problem? What's his or her concern or perspective about that problem? What are potential solutions to that problem? And as any good speech and language therapist will tell you, even kids who are completely nonverbal are communicating. Grunting is communicating. Growling is communicating. Screaming is communicating. Hitting is communicating. And we have now just stumbled upon one of the key themes of this model. All behavior is the mechanism by which the kid is communicating to us that he is stuck, that he is struggling. That's all behavior is. It's the signal. We don't want to work on the signal. We want to work on the problem that's causing the signal. So whether the kid is screaming or swearing or hitting or spitting or growling or grunting, we still have to figure out what unsolved problem is causing that behavior and start solving that problem. And let me go back to our speech and language therapists. As any good speech and language therapist will also tell you, there's lots of different ways to communicate with kids besides words. It can be done.
This is a follow-up question. Is Plan B possible if the teenager is apathetic? And there are a number of people who've said their children don't care. They don't care that they're in trouble at school. They don't care that they won't go to school. And they're sort of asking, is this an unsolved problem? Is this, how do they put that into this model?
Well,
that perceived apathy and
right.
lack of motivation.
The key word there is perceived. Perceived apathy, perceived lack of motivation. We're not going to roll with those. We're going to roll with the specific expectations the kid is having difficulty meeting. So once again, even if we think he doesn't care about doing the double-digit division problems on the worksheet in math, the unsolved problem is still difficulty completing the double-digit division problems on the worksheet in math, not the I don't care part. But now let's think about the I don't care part. I've worked with a lot of kids who said they didn't care. I've worked with them in prison. I've worked with them in school suspension rooms. I've worked with them on inpatient units. I've worked with them in families. I've had a kid who was recently in my office whose primary line is I don't care. What I always give thought to is, how would a kid get to that point? And having worked with a bunch of I don't care kids, given a fair amount of thought to how you could get a kid to I don't care. Here's the recipe. Take a kid who wants to do well. And by the way, the key theme of this model is kids do well if they can. Kids do well if they can. The assumption that if this kid could do well, he would do well, and that if he's not doing well, something must be getting in his way. All right, now let me continue with the recipe. Instead of figuring out what's really getting in the kid's way, let's instead assume that he's unmotivated and start applying motivational strategies that aren't really going to fix what's getting in the way that we don't really know anything about yet. We are just assuming. This is just our perception. So now let's start overcorrecting and over-directing and over-punishing this kid. And a few years later, what you have is the same pile of unsolved problems that were there 2 years ago, a bunch of strategies that we have tried based on our assumptions about what's getting in the kid's way, but that weren't true. And now you have a kid who is saying to himself, These adults are never going to get it. The strategies they are applying aren't working. I don't think I'm ever going to do well. I don't care. There's your recipe. I've got a different recipe, by the way. If a kid is having difficulty meeting an expectation, don't assume. I'm not going to repeat the expression about what happens when you assume because it's the family program, but my bet is that all of you know what happens when you assume. Truth is, what I've been saying in some of my talks lately is that I've been trying to live an assumption-free life lately. I call it assumption-free living. The minute I assume anything about anybody, kids included, I stop. I try to catch myself. And what do I say to myself? I say to myself, you know, I guess, Ross, you could come up with any variety of theories about what's getting in this person's way, but you'll be a whole lot better off getting it from the horse's mouth and going directly to the source, the kid. And then I don't have to assume. Assumption-free living is very freeing. I get rid of all my assumptions that were probably wrong in the first place. That's the thing about us adults. We think we're right, but we're usually wrong about what's getting in a kid's way. And then I can get rid of all of the interventions that were based on those erroneous assumptions, and I'm free. I'm free to figure out what's really getting in the kid's way, and I'm free to collaborate with the kid on solutions that will really address what's really getting in his way. Very freeing.
I think that one of the questions that we're seeing here is that people are having a hard time figuring out what the unsolved problem is. So there are a number of examples posted. Well, I'll just read one. My 12-year-old son has started spending a long time in the bathroom to avoid school. What if it's any time he finds it boring? How do I solve that? And how do I narrow down what the unsolved problem is? Let me guess, ask him. Is that right?
Well, no, the adult has to figure out what the unsolved problem is. You have to ask him about what his concern is. But it sounds like, and I don't necessarily have all the details I need here, we got two things going on there. One, the kid is spending a lot of time in the bathroom.
Right.
That's a behavior. We're not doing behaviors. And the theory is that it's because he's avoiding school. Now, what I would ask that parent, if that parent was sitting in my office, is, are you saying that he's having difficulty going to school? Mm-hmm. Going to school is the expectation. If he's having difficulty meeting that expectation, that is the unmet expectation, and the synonym for unmet expectation is unsolved problem. That's the unsolved problem, difficulty going to school.
Okay.
But what I don't know is if that's just a theory, because as you presented it, it is merely a theory. Mm-hmm. Spending a lot of time in the bathroom to avoid going to school. I can't quite decipher what the unsolved problem is there. I would have to ask a few more questions to figure it out. Okay.
So to your point about not making assumptions, that the way that was phrased had a tremendous number of assumptions in it. The problem, as defined, was that the child was probably bored with school and therefore, which, as you're saying just step back and try to.
This is the amazing part. We adults feel great pressure to explain. Mm-hmm. Bored, he hates his teacher. In this model, there is no pressure to explain. There is only pressure to find out.
Okay. Cindy asked the question. She says, I have read Dr. Greene's book, and I just have a really big problem going forward after identify the unsolved problems. I guess, and others have said this as well, there are so many of them, I'm not sure where to start, and the next step perplexes me. Can you give some more specific, they're really appreciating the specific examples as models for how to behave.
Where to start. Some people will say to me, there's so many unsolved problems, I don't know where to start, and then they don't start.
Yes.
The algorithm that I use for prioritizing is, first, if an unsolved problem is causing safety issues, that's going to be a high priority. If we don't have safety issues, then I'm going to go with frequency. I'll go with the 2 or 3 unsolved problems that are setting in motion challenging episodes most often. But what I always say to people is don't split hairs over where to start. It's more important to start than to split hairs over where to start. I've seen many people become paralyzed by the fact that they now know, and first of all, this is a good thing, by the way. It's good that we have now identified all of those unsolved problems, because now we know the mountain that lies before us, as I always say, and I'd rather know what all those unsolved problems are than have no clue and still be working on the kid's behavior. That's why the pile of unsolved problems got so big in the first place. We don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past. I'm glad we now know what they are. But the last thing we'd want to do is now say, but because there's so many of them and I can't decide which one to work on, I'm not going to work on any of them. Start. If prioritizing is paralyzing you, then don't prioritize. Just take a pencil, drop it on your list, and wherever it falls, start there.
Okay. Two examples from parents, one a 9-year-old and one a teenager, whose children become very upset. So here's one. My 9-year-old son will become upset when he doesn't get what he wants in the classroom, call names, knock things over, show extreme anger and frustration. How can the school help? And the second one, a teen was violent, throws things at his mother, curses, threatens when asked to do anything he doesn't want to do.
All right.
So two extreme forms of frustration, if you will. I mean, again, maybe that's an assumption, but...
Well, no, but they're both extreme forms. The problem is 98% of both of them is the kid's behavior.
Right, okay.
Now, if they're sitting in my office or if I'm consulting to their school, I'm saying, yeah, but when's that stuff happening?
Okay.
I don't want to hear about all the behavior, or I'll listen to it for 2 minutes, but I know that I'm not doing anybody any favors by having them continue on just talking about the kid's behavior. So, and the truth is, while many people slice the pie by the severity of the kid's behavior,
right,
I don't. The exact same unsolved problem can cause pouting in one kid, which most people would say is relatively mild, whining in another, also mild, crying in another, also mild. Now let's get less mild. Screaming, swearing, hitting, spitting, kicking, destroying, running. All of those could be caused by the exact same unsolved problem in different kids. Now, why are we so focused on the kid's behavior when it really doesn't tell us anything? What we really need to be focused on is what problems are causing those behaviors. Now we're going to start reducing behaviors because we're going to start solving the problems that are causing them. So if I'm hearing that, my next question is, yeah, well, I get it, and those are very serious behaviors, and we definitely want to put an end to those behaviors, but we are not going to put an end to those behaviors by talking about or focusing on those behaviors. So now let's focus on the stuff that will really help us get rid of those behaviors. Tell me the circumstances in which that's happening. And some people will say, some people who aren't yet skilled at thinking about unsolved problems will say, well, it happens all the time. Yeah, well, probably not all the time, but tell me when. Like when he's having difficulty with the spelling words. Oh, does he have difficulty with the spelling words? He does. Great, that's an unsolved problem. When else do those behaviors happen? When the kids won't play with him on the playground. Really? So he's having difficulty finding people to play with on the playground? Yes, every day. Great, that's another unsolved problem. That's how the process goes. So I try very hard to get people to stop talking about the behavior and to move them on to the problems that are causing those behaviors. Crucial.
Interesting. So the person who said, my teen becomes violent when asked to do things that he doesn't want to do is making the assumption that what's causing the behavior is things that he doesn't want to do. And you're saying, need to know much more information about what is triggering that behavior than that phrase, is I think what you're saying.
What I would ask next is, so tell me what things you think he doesn't want to do. Now I'm going to get at the unmet expectations. Or I could ask better, even more explicitly, what is it that you want him to do that he's having difficulty doing? And now I'm going to hear about unsolved problems. So we've now moved from behavior to theory, he doesn't want to do them, to, yeah, but you know what? Tell me the expectations.
Specifically,
difficulty meeting. And now I've got the raw material I need to get moving.
Okay, that's really helpful. You mentioned social kids who are unhappy in friendship issues at school, and there are a great number of questions from parents of children who have social problems. I'll just read one from Frank B. What does Dr. Greene recommend for children 9 to 12 years old who very much want to have friends, be popular, and so are excessive in their behavior to get attention? Especially for ADHD children who covet immediate gratification, how can children be guided to avoid negative behaviors that tend to result in immediate negative feedback?
Wow, that's loaded.
That's really loaded.
There's
a lot of
in
assumptions there now that I'm hearing you reading it through your perspective. Yeah,
quite a few. But truth is, we want to weed through the assumptions, and we want to see if we could come up with a refined, unsolved problem about the expectation the kid is having difficulty meeting. And I'd want to be as specific as I could be about the different places where that's happening, and perhaps even specific about the different kids who he or she would like to be friends with. Truth is, we could probably get 2 or 3 unsolved problems out of all of that. But at a very basic level, it might be difficulty finding someone to play with during recess. Now, I don't know if that's what would be the case in this particular instance, because there wasn't enough information in what you read for me to decipher a very specific unsolved problem from it. Another could be difficulty entering the box ball game during recess. That might get at some of what the person who sent in that question was getting at. But the real challenge here is to get rid of all of the theories, to get rid of any assumptions that might go along with just because this kid has ADHD, and really get to a specific unsolved problem, because the reality is we're really not going to know what's getting in this kid's way until we ask, and until we get the information we need from the horse's mouth.
Just a little addendum to the person who said that the child became violent when asked to do things that they didn't want to do. The example was when playing Xbox, asked to clean his room. So there's
now we're getting there, aren't we? So difficulty, well, that could be split into 2 different unsolved problems. I'm not positive that they have to be together. Difficulty ending the Xbox game when it's time could be one unsolved problem, and that's an unsolved problem a lot of kids have. Difficulty cleaning room could be another unsolved problem. So one thing we'd have to decide is, do we want to put those 2 together or separate them? But it is very gratifying to hear that we have now moved from the behavior to the problems that are causing that behavior. Now we can start solving problems instead of modifying behavior.
Okay. That's another common statement here. There's another person, my 10-year-old son always wants to be on technology, never satisfied with the amount of time. I'm sure you've seen this. We hear this frequently, a technology problem. So I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on that specific area of behavior.
It's a very tough unsolved problem.
Right.
And bottom line is, just to be perfectly technical about it, we have to word it as an unsolved problem. And here's what I'll say about that unsolved problem. From the adult perspective, we just have a kid who is lingering on the video game. That's our perspective. But I'm always amazed at what I hear from the kid in the empathy step about what's taking so long. Once again, from the adult perspective, we see what we see. He's having trouble getting off the video game when I tell him to, or he's having difficulty getting off the video game when the allotted time has elapsed. That's what we're seeing. But we have much to learn about what's getting in the way for that kid, and I truly do hear some fascinating things from kids.
Really?
About what's hard about getting off the video game. Often, but not always, it has to do with moving up a level, how much time it takes to move up a level, whether the amount of time they have to play the video game is enough to move up the level, what they do when there's not enough time. What I always say about unsolved problems is that they often become a lot more complex once you actually start learning about them. The trick is to learn about them. If we don't learn about them, then our only focus is on getting the kid off the video game. That doesn't usually go well. That's just our expectation. The whole goal of this model is to not only address our concern, but also address the kid's concern, and it's going to be impossible to address the kid's concern if we don't know what the kid's concern is.
Okay. Is what you're saying, we've heard this recommendation on the video game issue is it's been recommended actually that parents get involved in the video game, especially Minecraft apparently, and understand how it works, even play the video game with their child, get involved in it, and understand it better. Is that what you're saying by understanding?
Well, no. What I mean by understanding is asking the kid what's going on.
Okay.
It's possible that if you understand Minecraft, you'll be in a better position to talk about it with your kid. Mm-hmm. But I would also say that simply getting involved in Minecraft is not going to necessarily get the kid off the Minecraft game any quicker.
Okay. All right. We're running out of time here. Let me turn to some questions, a number of questions that have come in about how to introduce this model in the classroom. Several people have said, my school has a complete punitive consequences model. They don't seem to understand at all that there's another way to deal with children's behavior or with ADHD children specifically. Any suggestions for how to introduce this way of thinking into the school?
It depends on whether you're a parent or somebody who works in the school. Mm-hmm. If you're a parent, my usual recommendation is that you find someone in the building who can guide you and will be most receptive to changing things for the better for your kid, but in ways that are different than the way discipline is presently being administered in the school. So find somebody. You can also, give a copy of my book, Lost at School, to the principal and hope he or she reads it. Mm-hmm. But I'm usually recommending that you find somebody in the building who can guide you in terms of how you should proceed to change things for the better for your kid. If you are an educator and you're interested in getting this going in your building, my usual recommendation, and this is not about book sales, this is just the way most schools do it, is that you start a reading group and have Lost at School be what you read, and then start practicing the model. And Lost at School takes you from start to finish in terms of how to do this in a school building. That's what I would recommend for people who work in a building.
Okay. That sounds like a great idea. Okay. Great thank yous posting. This is a wonderful webinar, so informative. How soon can we, I'm loving this. Thank you, Attitude. Thank you, Dr. Greene. So as always, it's so refreshing to hear you talk, Dr. Greene, and such a reminder every time to stop thinking about the behavior and thinking about what's going on. And so we're very grateful to you and hope you'll return another time.
Anytime. Thanks for inviting me to do this.
And thanks again to Attention 360, our sponsor this time. Wonderful set of online communication portal for parents, schools, and medical professionals to communicate. It's a Pearson ADHD solution, attention360.com. Try a free trial. Thank you both so much. Bye now.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.